I'm now going to walk you through an end-to-end demo of the powerful Incorta BI and analytics platform. We often refer to this demo as a cooking show, and we call it that because I'm going to start by showing you the completed solution and then step back and construct that solution from the ground up, step by step, ingredient by ingredient. And so the scenario here is that we work for an online sporting goods store, and we really want to understand and assess how weather impacts the buying patterns of our customers. So we'll start out by connecting to two separate data sources. The first one is our point of sale system, which happens to be a MySQL database. And the second one is a bunch of weather data, which will be in flat file extracts. So we'll connect to those sources and actually mirror them in the Incorta platform. The second thing we'll do is we'll ingest and load the data into the Incorta platform. From there, we'll create a set of relationships across these two disparate data sources and invoke our core technology, which is called direct data mapping. And really, direct data mapping is our core innovation, and it's what differentiates us from other BI platforms in the market. And really what direct data mapping does is it builds intelligence about the data and the data's relationship, and that intelligence is what allows us to take a fundamentally different approach to BI and get lightning fast performance across the platform. The fourth thing we'll do is we'll create a business schema or a business view, which is essentially an abstraction layer from the physical layer that allows us to organize the data into consumable business entities that really facilitates that self-service for our end users. And finally, we'll derive insights from the data using the Incorta visualization layer. All right, so let's go ahead and log into the Incorta platform. Incorta is a modern browser-based HTML5 application. And so it doesn't matter if you're a DBA or someone building data sources or building dashboards or even just consuming dashboards. It's the same interface for everyone when you log in. It's a single tool, and you're basically exposed to different functionality based on your security preferences. By default, everyone logs into the content section, and this essentially represents all the dashboards that I've created or that have been shared with me. And so let's take a look at the sporting goods sales analysis dashboard. This is the end result of our cooking show. This is the quote unquote casserole that we're eventually going to be building. So we'll step back and build this from the ground up, but this is the end goal. And so the first step in any sort of BI and data analytics process is data acquisition. And as I mentioned earlier, we're basically going to be bringing in data from two different data sources. The first one is our point of sale system. So again, we're an online sporting goods store. This is our point of sale system that exists behind that online sporting goods store. It happens to be a MySQL database, but again, it could reside in a variety of different data sources. And these are all the connectors you see here. This is actually a subset of all the connectors that Incorta has built into the platform. So I'm going to test this connection to make sure it's live, which it is. And then our second data source is a flat file. It's actually a CSV file of all the weather data over a 5-year period. That's already been brought into the platform as well. And so the next step is we're going to start bringing the data into the platform. Okay, so let's move over to the schema section within Incorta. And so a schema within Incorta is very similar to a schema within, say, a database. It's a logical grouping of tables for organization and security purposes. And so we essentially want to create two new physical schemas, one for the point of sale system and one for the weather data. And so I'm going to launch our schema wizard, and we'll go ahead and call this sporting, goods POS, and we'll point this to our point of sale system and hit next. And now Incorta is inspecting that source system. And so we can click through and start mapping those tables as needed. And we have control here, right? We can change the label, we can change the mapping type and function that are auto-discovered by Incorta. But for this demo, I'm gonna mirror our source system 100%. So I'm gonna bring over every single table, every single data attribute as it is within the source system. And I'll keep this checkbox checked, which is basically going to detect joins from the source system. And now what we've done is we've created a skeleton schema in Incorta that mirrors that source system 100%. And I'm going to go ahead and load the data. And so Incorta supports both full and incremental loads. The full loads are obviously necessary for the first time load, but after that, Incorta can facilitate incremental refreshes of large scale source systems, hundreds and thousands of tables, and get refreshes everywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. The one thing to point out is if we take a look at the ERD here, we haven't reshaped the data at all. We haven't flattened it. We've mirrored that source system 100% as it exists in the wild. So we can see this is an OLTP system in third normal form. we're mirroring that. We don't need to create a star schema. We don't need to flatten and reshape the data into some sort of rigid structure. We're going to mirror that system as it exists within the wild and do analysis and analytics on top of it. And if we take a look at our loading status, we're about 45 seconds in, but we can get insight into all the 32 tables, their sort of status, things that are happening in parallel, the extraction. If we run into any sort of rejected rows, we can inspect those, and then what finally gets loaded. So we finished up there at 56 seconds. So we loaded about 25 million records across 32 tables in under a minute. It's pretty good performance. And like I said, incremental refreshes on a data source of this size would be within the seconds and low minutes. So that's our first schema. That's our point of sale system. Now the next thing we want to do is use our weather data. And I'm not going to create a new schema for that since we already have one built here, but we'll take a look at this weather schema. It's a single table. It's about 74 million records, 20 different columns. The important thing to point out though is it's about 2.34 gigabytes within Incorta. And the reason I want to point that out is that source file in its sort of raw nature is over 10 gigabytes. And so this highlights the very efficient compression that we leverage in Incorta. And that basically means that the footprint in Incorta of your source systems will always be smaller. It's not like a data warehouse where you're blowing it out to 5x. We actually shrink it down in Incorta, and that makes it just a much more efficient, footprint when it comes to data utilization. Okay, so let's go back to our new point of sale schema. And what I want to do now is I want to create a relationship across these two different schemas and two disparate data sources. And so all I need to do is click up on the add join, and I'm going to select our sales order header table, and we'll use the order date from that table. And then I'll select our weather schema, again, that completely separate physical schema, the weather table inside of that, and then the date. And then we'll also do a secondary key on zip code. And so now what I've done when I hit done is I created a join across those two disparate data sources. And if you look up top here, what's happening is that direct data mapping intelligence is being invoked. That intelligence is right now being built across those two disparate data sources. And what that means is that when our business users come in and they want to start querying things across these two very disparate data sources, they get the benefits of that intelligence from a query performance perspective. So that'll take a couple different seconds. You can see it's finished. And now if we take a look at our ERD, we'll see that we have, the same schema that we saw earlier, but now we have a relationship across to a different disparate data source. Okay, so from this point, we could start analyzing the data directly. I could go up here to explore data, and we could start building things within our visualization tier. But as I mentioned earlier, we want to take that one step where we're going to create that business level, that business schema abstraction away from the physical layer. So we'll do that next. Okay, so let's navigate over to the business schema section within Incorta. And so again, a business schema is basically a logical abstraction away from that physical layer. Allows us to greatly simplify and organize into different business layers that eventually become the interface for our business users to interact with. And so again, if you look back at our physical schema and all the complexity there, we had 32 plus tables, then the weather data and all the different joins there. We don't want to expose that to our end users. We want to expose things in consumable business context and business friendly entities that they can build dashboards off of. And so to create a business schema, it's really straightforward. We just hit create schema here. We'll call it sporting biz. And then you can have multiple views within a business schema. We'll just call this sales. And then I'll go over here and I'll add the tables that we're going to source from. So we'll use the sporting goods point of sale as well as our weather data. And then to create a business schema, it's pretty straightforward. You just start dragging and dropping fields over. So we'll pull over city. We'll pull over, let's look at our max temperature from our weather data. Let's look at, categories, so subcategory, category name. And then maybe we want to look at everything in our sales detail. So we'll just go down here and say, let's pull over our sales detail. And we start to build out our business schema that way. The thing that's really nice in business schemas is that you can rename things. So again, we can preserve the integrity of the source system at our physical layer. We can mirror it 100%. But if we want to start to abstract away and put things in more business-friendly context and terms, we can make changes here. So max temp could instead be, daily temperature. and we make the change at the label level there. That formula column I showed you a little bit earlier, you also have the ability to create those at the business schema layer. The only difference is they're not persisted, so they're evaluated at runtime, which has both advantages and disadvantages. So I'll hit done here. For the next step, we're actually going to leverage an existing business schema. I'm going to use this biz AW here just because I don't want to have to walk you through, the steps to bring in 46 columns. I already know these are here and they've already been renamed. So we're actually going to use this business schema for the next step in the process. But before we do that, let's step back and look at where we are in the flow. And so if we take a look again at what we wanted to do here, we started by connecting and mirroring the data sources. We brought in the data or ingested and loaded that data into Incorta. We created a relationship across those two disparate data sources and physical schemas. We just created our, abstraction layer, our business schema. And now we're at a point where, even as a business user, we're going to interact with that business schema to start building dashboards and insight from the data. Okay, so now we're ready to start analyzing the data. We've done a lot of plumbing up until this point, but now we want to start deriving some insight from that data. And so I could go over to the content section of the platform and create a dashboard from scratch, but a pretty cool feature in Incorta is this Explore Data feature. And this actually exists at multiple points within the platform. And it's a way to interact with the data without having to commit to an actual dashboard. So when you think about data discovery and when you're first bringing data into the platform, it's a really powerful feature to start exploring that data without, again, having to commit to a dashboard. So let's do that. And by default, it brings us into a column chart insight, but Incorta supports a variety of different visualization and charting insights. And then on our left-hand side here, we can see the columns that are being exposed through that business schema, through that semantic layer. And so let's take a look at revenue. Let's look at revenue, and then let's break revenue down by, maybe month and year. And then let's pull in category as a coloring dimension. That's a bit of an eyesore, so let's change this to a line chart, and we'll call this revenue by category and month/year. And so now, I've created a dashboard, we've derived a little bit of insight, and now maybe I'm ready to commit to a dashboard. So I'll hit Save in New Dashboard, and this names the dashboard basically off of that business schema, but we can quickly edit that. And now we have a single insight within our dashboard. And in a dashboard in Incorta, like a lot of other visualization tools, is a collection of multiple insights. We have one right now, but we're going to add a bunch more to kind of create a compelling and interactive experience. So let's add another insight. We'll go up here and we'll select, let's do column chart again. Actually, let's do line chart. And let's bring in revenue. And then let's also look at that temperature. So that's from that weather schema. And it's sort of a traditional bell curve, maybe as we would expect here, as the temperature goes up to about the 79, 80 mark. We see sales increase, and then it sort of drops off pretty substantially as you get to 100. Let's bring in category as well. And let's change this to a column chart. It's a little bit more interesting from an insight perspective. And we'll call this revenue by temperature. And hit done. And now we have multiple insights, and we can drag these up next to one another and hit save. And another thing that's cool is you can duplicate insights very easily in Incorta. So maybe I want to do a slight variation of this existing insight. I can just go over here and hit duplicate. Creates a new one at the bottom. And then if we edit it, this is cool. We have month, year, we have revenue, we have category name, but let's actually create a drill down experience. So I'm going to call up subcategory, and I'm going to call up product name, and then let's bring in city. And let's change this to a column chart. And instead of month, year, let's just do it at a high level by year. That's much better. And then we'll just call this revenue by year. And then I'll say drill down. Hit done. And I'll go ahead and organize these. Just bring it up, move that over. And the cool thing about this insight is that we can start interacting with it. So if I click on, components, everything updates. So not only is my max temperature, my revenue by temperature, only looking at it from our components category of products, so is our revenue by category month and year. And I could drill in further. I could take a look at, let's look at road frames. So now we've drilled into another level of detail. And let's look at this one product here. Let's look at the HL road frame Red 62. And now we see how that's distributed over time, based on max temperature, and then all the different cities that it's associated with. Maybe this is a bit of an eyesore, so we might want to consider changing it, but you get the general idea of how you can create that drill down relationship, and every insight is impacted and updated based on what you're selecting. So I'll clear our filter for now, and the next thing we're going to do is let's build out a pivot table. All right, so let's go ahead and launch that pivot table insight, and we'll look at revenue and order quantity. And then we'll slice this by category as well as subcategory, and then use the pivot table columns of, let's just do year and month. Whoops, slide that up, and then month. We'll call this pivot. And hit done. And so now we have our visualizations at the top, and we have our pivot table, and that pivot table is actually being generated from a bunch of different tables. So if we actually edit it and take a look at one of our measures here and go to advanced, we can see the query plan, and we can see that pivot table is actually executing that query across those 6 different tables. And the sales order detail has 10 million records in and of itself. So not in the billions of records, but definitely shows you some of the complexity, and then rendering the pivot table and all the calculations that go with that on top of it. Pretty quick performance. All right, so we have our high-level visualizations, we got our pivot table, and then finally let's add a detail table. This is one of the big benefits of Incorta, is the fact that you can always get into the detailed level data below it. So let's look at revenue. Let's look at, order quantity. What else do we want to look at? Let's take a look at product name. How about customer ID? What else? Maybe let's look at city. Maybe subcategory name and category name. So obviously you get the idea here. We can arrange these however we want. Let's do customer ID there, city, category name, subcategory, product, revenue, order quantity. We'll call this details. The nice thing here is that we have our high-level visualizations, which are really powerful in and of themselves. They draw the eye, they get us to the areas that we may want to focus in on. We then have a nice way to sort of aggregate and look at this data in a bunch of different slices with a pivot table. But then more importantly, we got the 9 million detailed level transactions down here at the bottom. And where this really becomes powerful is when we start interacting with the data live. And so if I go up to the search capabilities, which is another very powerful feature in Incorta, and I start typing in Chicago, you can see I get the type ahead search here. And then if I select Chicago, everything updates. So our revenue by temperature is now based on how temperature impacts the buying patterns of our customers in Chicago. Same thing for revenue by year. Our pivot table is updated, and now we see the 26,000 plus sales invoices that we've had in the city of Chicago. And we can continue to do that. Maybe we're interested in seeing how, fenders sold in the month of May in 2012. We can click on that slice in the pivot table, and again, everything else updates. And we get down to the 2 records, the 2 sales orders that actually make up that slice. And our revenue and our quantity will add up as well, because ultimately it's always the same data. We can remove these filters. We could save them off as a bookmark if it's something of interest. And we're back to that high-level view of the dashboard. And so that concludes the demo today, looking at our sales data and analyzing it from a weather perspective. But if we step back and kind of analyze what we went through in 15 odd minutes in this demonstration, we started from scratch. We connected to 2 different data sources. We mirrored a point of sale system. We brought it into Incorta exactly as it resides in the source system. No reshaping, no ETL, no complex rigid star schema or cube structure. We created a business level business schema on top of that physical layer, and then we constructed a dashboard in a pretty easy and sort of self-service model, all within 15 minutes.